Konbanwa, and good evening to those who are tuning in from Houston and across the US, and good morning or ohayo gozaimasu to our friends from Japan and from Singapore. I'm Patsy Brown, Executive Director of Japan America Society of Houston, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the 2021 Japan Currents Houston Conference. This year actually marks the Japan America Society of Houston's 6th year of bringing together experts from Japan and the US to examine the impact of US-Japan relations on Houston, Harris County, and Texas. And while we wish we were engaging with you in person today, we are grateful to have this virtual opportunity, to jointly explore the US-Japan energy ties. Tonight's event would not be possible without the support of the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C., and the National Association of Japan America Societies. Joining us from the National Association of Japan America Societies is President Peter Kelly. Peter, yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Good evening. Good evening, Patsy, and good morning to all of you in Japan attending this. I'm Peter Kelly from the National Association of Japan America Societies, and we welcome you to the Japan Currents. As Patsy mentioned, this is the 6th Japan Currents program for the Japan America Society of Houston. There are 38 Japan America Societies all around North America. There are 4 in Texas, and this Japan America Society of Houston is one of our most active of all of the 38 societies. The job of the National Association of Japan America Societies, where I work, is to help provide high-quality Japan-related programming to our members. We run a whole series of program series. The public affairs series is called the Japan Currents. This year, there are 14 Japan Currents taking place at different Japan America societies during February and March. Each of the societies chooses a local theme, which is of interest in the US-Japan relationship, but particularly in the local area. Earlier this afternoon, I attended a presentation with the Japan American Society of Minnesota, which featured the soybean industry from North Dakota, which interestingly exports a tremendous amount of its products to Japan. Tonight's theme, chosen by the Japan American Society of Houston, is energy, an area of great interest to both the United States and Japan, and one with tremendous significance as we go forward. All of us in other parts of the country hope that we're sorry to hear of the energy situation in Texas recently, and we hope that both the weather and the energy supplies have recovered. Each year, Patsy and Laird Doran host this meeting in person at the Petroleum Club in Houston. We are sorry we cannot be there tonight, but we have 2 wonderful speakers who will get you up to date on the issue of energy and the US-Japan relationship. I look forward to this evening.
Thank you, Peter. We truly appreciate all the work that you do to support public dialogue on issues of interest to both Japan and the United States. Gratitude is also owed to the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C. for their support of tonight's event. Representing the embassy this evening is the Consul General of Japan in Houston, the Honorable Hideo Fukushima. The Consulate General of Japan in Houston is actually marking a major milestone this year, their 80th anniversary. So please join me in congratulating Consul General Fukushima on the Consulate General of Japan in Houston's 80th anniversary. Soroji omedetou gozaimasu.
Hello, Patty-san, thank you. Thank you so much for having me in this special program. I want to thank Josh for coordinating this conference on Japan-Texas Energy Corporation, as well as NAJAS for providing general support as always. I'm also so grateful for today's special panelists who generously agreed to join us. The partnership the consulate enjoys with Josh has been long running, as we just last week celebrated the 80th anniversary of the consulate's opening in Houston. I'd like to reiterate my deep appreciation for the invaluable support of local communities across Texas as we work together towards shared prosperity. Among such efforts, the energy sector is particularly relevant in Houston, the energy capital of the world. The close collaboration between Japanese energy-related companies and their local partners has been accelerating in recent years. One such notable success story is the Freeport LNG export facility, which has contributed both to enhancing US energy exports and diversifying Japan's energy portfolio after a few years. However, under the current pandemic, we are together faced with new challenges to pioneer more resilient and sustainable energy strategies. In particular, tackling the daunting challenge of climate change will require new thinking and innovation. Japan and Texas can effectively work together towards those goals based on a long history of cooperation. For example, hydrogen energy, a federal project called H2 at Scale is underway in Texas with participation from renowned Japanese companies like Mitsubishi Heavy and Toyota. The project is expected to pave the way for wide-scale hydrogen energy by taking advantage of Texas' existing production capabilities and the vast potential for renewables. I welcome the progress of such forward-thinking collaborations between Japan and Texas. Thank you once again for organizing today's discussion, and I do look forward to learning from the insights of today's panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General Fukushima. The efforts of the consulate have truly contributed significantly to the Japan-America Society, as well as to the vibrancy of US-Japan exchange in our region, and we are extremely grateful. For those who missed the virtual 80th anniversary celebration of the consulate, please visit their website, the Consulate General of Japan in Houston, to view the recording. Moving on to tonight's program. Tonight, we gather in a time as Japan commemorates the 20th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami and the nuclear accident that ensued at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. In the wake of the disaster that sparked Japan's worst energy crisis in the post-war period, Japan shut down its nuclear power plants, and Texas shale gas and LNG helped compensate for the loss. Now, 10 years on, where does Japan find itself, and what are the key areas of ongoing US-Japan energy collaboration? Joining us to provide expert insights are from Tokyo, Jun Arima, Senior Policy Fellow for Energy and Environment at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, otherwise known as the ERIA, and Professor of Energy Security, International Energy Governance, and Environmental Policies in the University of Tokyo Graduate School of Public Policy. From Washington, DC, we have Jane Nakano. Jane is a Senior Fellow in the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic International Studies, also affectionately known as the CSIS. From down the road in Houston, welcome Takuo Monguchi, Senior Vice President at Tokyo Gas America. And graciously agreeing to moderate tonight's conversation from Singapore is Stephen Stepczynski, business reporter with Bloomberg News. Before I turn the program over to Stephen, I'd like to remind the audience that our speakers will be taking questions later in the evening. Please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your question. With that information, Stephen, the screen is all yours. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Thank you, Patsy. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to moderate this panel of experts from around the world. Before we jump into hearing from the experts, I'll give a quick overview of what's happened this last winter. A cold snap, both in Japan and in the United States, reverberated across energy markets. And it's something I think we should just quickly focus on for one moment. For Japan, in the middle of December, we began to see that Japan's spot power prices were rising. We called our sources and learned that some utilities were receiving some LNG shipments later than usual because of congestion at the Panama Canal. That forced them to lower output from their gas-fired power plants. This was immediately a red flag to our reporters, who learned that this was just the tip of an iceberg that would emerge in late December when power prices really began to rise. A sudden cold blast in Japan, much colder than normal for winter weather, boosted heating and electricity demand at the end of December and into early January. Gas inventories were quickly being drained, so utilities across the country curbed output from power plants. Snowy weather limited output at solar panels, and to make matters worse, roughly all of Japan's operable nuclear power plants were in planned maintenance. All of these issues translated into a very low power supply situation, and wholesale electricity rates surged 2,900% in the first few weeks of January. The government quickly responded and made a rare order that all power plant owners boost their capacity to maximum output and sell all excess electricity to the spot market. Meanwhile, utilities asked customers to conserve electricity. All of these efforts together did in fact help avoid blackouts, but the cost was great for some utilities. They were forced to buy LNG from the spot market at rates around $35 per million British thermal units. Put that into context, LNG prices were around $2 in April 2020. Now, looking at Texas and central United States for that matter, something similar but much larger and quite tragic happened in the United States in February, as you're all very aware. In the second week of February, my colleagues in the US were reporting that some gas wells in Oklahoma were freezing over. Again, this was a prelude to a record-breaking deep freeze that hit central United States and left millions without electricity. Everything came to a head when temperatures in Texas fell below freezing levels. Texas's grid, while disconnected from the rest of the country, means that it's unable to pull power from neighboring states in times of crisis. But perhaps the bigger problem, according to most experts on the state's energy system, is that Texas's energy infrastructure simply isn't built for colder temperatures. Freeze-offs meant that there was less shale gas and oil being produced. Compressors, which pushed gas into pipelines, were too cold to function. There were wind farms that were freezing over, and even a nuclear power plant had to shut one of its reactors after some of its equipment tripped. When you look at all of this, you see that cold weather this winter affected both Japan and the United States, and both governments are kicking off full-blown investigations into their own crises. They might demand that utilities weatherize power plants or figure out ways to have larger gas inventories to avoid these sorts of problems. But I think it also shows that there are lessons that both nations can learn from. And this can be a level of cooperation that they can pull together to avoid similar problems in the future. And that's why it's great that the Japan-America Society of Houston is having this event, because there are lessons to be learned and experts should be sharing their views, not just in their own countries, but on these panels on the internet and in person someday when travel opens back up. So thank you for letting me just quickly give an overview as to what's happening. And I'll first go to Arima Sensei to provide his view on the presentation on the Japan focus of the last 10 years and moving forward. Arima Sensei, please.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your kind introduction. So could you please put my slides on the screen? Yes, it is a pleasure to share my perspective on Japan's energy and climate challenges. And next one, please. Next one, please. Yes, as you know, Prime Minister Suga announced 2015. Oh no, before one. Yes, as you know, Prime Minister Suga announced 2050 carbon neutrality target goal last October. As a roadmap to carbon neutrality, Green Growth Strategy was published last December as well. And characterized as industrial policy, it identifies 14 priority fields for achieving virtuous cycle of economic growth and environmental protection. And this spells out comprehensive policies for achieving those goals, such as budget, tax, and regulatory reform. Next one, please. And in the Green Growth Strategy, an indicative picture for 2050 carbon neutrality was presented. In 2050, all the power sector will be completely decarbonized, 50-60% from renewables and 30-40% from nuclear and thermal plus CCUS and 10% from hydrogen. And for non-power sector, the electrification will be promoted as much as possible, and then hydrogen, methanation, and so on. And remaining use of fossil fuel will be neutralized by deforestation and DAX. Next one, please. And while this 2050 energy mix is just an indicative one, but it will certainly have an impact on the ongoing discussion about the revision of the strategic energy plan. And this will also lead to eventually the revision of the current NDC, National Determined Contribution, and the Paris target. The current one is 26% reduction from 2005 level by 2013 level by 2030. And the current NDC is underpinned by the energy mix, aiming at the share of so-called non-fossil energy to 44%, 20-24% from renewables, and 20-22% from nuclear. And however, 2050 carbon neutrality goal will call for perhaps the revision of the NDC to upward. Next one, please. And progress towards the current NDC is mixed. For renewable, it has been strongly promoted thanks to very much generous FID, feed-in tariff, while the subsidy burden has also mushroomed as well. And on the other hand, the nuclear restarting is much slower than expected. And because of the very slow assessment process by Nuclear Regulatory Authority. And currently only 9 reactors are under operation. Under such situation, further upwarding the NDC is really challenging. It could be, of course, technically possible, but it could be very much costly. Next one, please. The green growth strategy is expecting a lot from offshore wind. And the problem of Japanese offshore wind is the wind situation in Japan is much weaker compared with that in North Sea in Europe. And this graph compares the utilization ratio of the wind power throughout the year. And as you can see, in the summertime, Japanese wind power could be very much, lowly utilized, just 20% or something. So the annual utilization ratio for Japan could be about 35%, while the utilization ratio in North Sea is 55%. So that means Japanese offshore wind could be much costly than Europe. Next one, please. So I have talked a lot about the cost because Japan is currently facing very much high energy price and energy cost among major countries. For example, as you can see, for electricity tariff for industrial sector, Japan is the highest among major countries, about 2 times compared with the United States and 1.5 times more expensive than Korea and China. And you may consider that the level of industrial policy, electricity price for Japan and Germany could be somehow similar, but actually German electricity tariff is very much largely exempted, in particular for energy-intensive industries. If you can see the the right graph for energy-intensive industry for Germany is exempted of the renewable energy surcharge and also electricity tax and also grid cost for offshore wind and wheeling charges. So as a result, the actual burden borne by German energy-intensive industry is just the 60-70% lower than those in Japan. So even higher electricity costs for Japan could erode international competitiveness of Japanese manufacturing industries. Next one, please. So to cope with energy security and climate challenge, it is a logical and also pragmatic solution to utilize the nuclear technologies. They are also the made in Japan technologies. This is the excerpt from the IEA's World Energy Outlook, and IEA suggests higher share of renewables and nuclear towards 2040 in the Paris compatible pathways. However, nuclear phobia is still very much rampant in Japan, and it is the pity that such dichotomous argument as nuclear or renewable is still prevalent in Japan since 2011. Next one, please. And as I said, the biggest hurdle for Japan's nuclear sector is public attitude. According to the opinion poll in 2019, only 11% of respondents consider that nuclear option should be further developed or maintained, the blue part. And 49% of the respondents consider that nuclear should be utilized for the time being, but should be gradually phased out, that is yellow part. And interestingly, the younger generation and also well-informed people tend to support maintaining a nuclear option or developing nuclear option. And now Japan is aiming at carbon neutrality by 2050, and US and EU as a whole are clearly regarding nuclear as one of the arrow in the quiver for achieving carbon neutrality towards 2050. So Japan does not have a luxury to rule out one particular option, namely nuclear. That is my perspective. Next one, please. And Japan should also consider, the contribution to low carbon or decarbonized future for Asian region, because Asia is the epicenter of the incremental CO2 emissions from now to 2040, 50, and beyond. And unless Asian region is, see tangible progress towards decarbonization, then the Paris target will never be achieved. And in particular, such region as India and ASEAN, they will continuously grow their CO2 emissions. So therefore, how Japan could make tangible contribution for their endeavor for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Next one, please. And low carbon and decarbonization in Asia must be affordable, because unlike Sweden, as you can see, the priority of climate change is not necessarily the top in Asian developing regions such as China and Indonesia. In fact, in China, the priority for climate change is 15th out of 17 SDGs, and Indonesia 9th out of 17. So this shows a clear contrast from Sweden, where climate change is regarded as a top priority. So that is not surprising, because the economic development stage is different. So the priority among 17 SDGs should be also different across the countries. So therefore, we should recognize such a difference of the priorities, and for Asian countries to uptake low carbon technologies or decarbonization technologies, those technologies need to be affordable. Very expensive policy will never fly in those countries. Next one, please. So to sum up, I think 2050 carbon neutrality target is really challenging for Japan, and so I think the making use of nuclear is indispensable. But the currently, we are expecting U.S. climate summit to be held on 22nd of April, and there will be clearly a pressure to Japan from inside and also outside, including from the United States, to raise 2030 target in line with 2050 carbon neutrality target. But we need to recognize that Japan has many handicaps, such as we don't have any domestic fossil fuels, and we don't have any cross-border network, such as power grid or gas pipeline. And we could consider renewable as a domestic energy, but we have a very much narrow land, and it is not conducive for wind power and solar power, and deep sea, which is not conducive for offshore wind. And we have still very much strong anti-nuclear sentiment among general public. So to cope with this very much challenging situation, I think innovative technologies are the keys for the long-term decarbonization in Japan, such as battery or hydrogen or CCUS and so on. And if we could export those technologies to the third countries, then we could achieve the virtuous cycle for economic growth and environmental protection. And in this regard, I think there is a strong potential for US-Japan collaboration. And the Biden administration is taking so-called technology neutral approach for decarbonization of the power sector. So they're going to use all the available options, including nuclear, CCUS, hydrogen, and renewable, and so on. And Japan is as well are going to make use of all the available options. And also, US is very much interested in innovation, and Japan is also interested in innovation. So there could be some collaboration between US and Japan. For example, CCUS in the third country, most notably Asian countries, because Asian country will still depend on fossil fuels. So if we could develop a demonstration project of the CCUS in one of the Asian countries, then that would make a tremendous contribution to the low carbon future in this region. But again, I'd like to repeat my point that technologies need to be affordable for the wide uptake in Asia. So I think I should stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to having further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arima-san. That was a very good overview on the what Japan is looking at for 2030, what they're looking at 2050, and how they can try to achieve those goals. I have a quick follow-up question for you. You looked very much toward 2050 and 2030, but I'm looking just right in front of us. We in Japan just this last January there was quite a severe power crunch, the worst since the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami that led to the Fukushima disaster. Just looking at January, what vulnerabilities do you see in Japan's power market that should be fixed, and what should the Japanese government do to find those issues and try to avoid the power crunch from happening again?
Yeah, thank you very much for a very much good question. There are multiple problems about Japanese power market. And for example, the interconnection between various regions are still weak. So we should further enhance the grid connection between various power supply regions. And also, the biggest reason of the skyrocketing LNG spot price is that the Japan is still counting a lot for LNG power generation, and that is coming from the very slow progress of the nuclear restarting. So if nuclear was operating much larger than the current level, then there must have been less pressure on the LNG import, and there must have been less pressure for LNG market price. So I think the current power crunch also showed the fundamental problem of the very much slow progress of the nuclear restarting. But under the current political situation, nobody dare to speak about the necessity of the nuclear restarting loudly. So I think we are somehow neglecting 800 pounds gorilla. So I think the most recent power crunch and also the blackout in Hokkaido last year also shows that we should not turn our back to this very fundamental problem of nuclear issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Arima-san. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Both Kyushu Electric and Kansai Electric weren't running. They were running the lowest amount of nuclear reactors in a number of years after restarting some of the facilities after Fukushima. So they depended more on LNG, and that wasn't an issue for them this last winter. I look forward to speaking more with Arima-sensei about that going forward, but let's shift our focus more towards the United States. I'll hand it over to Nakano-san to give her view on the U.S. and her presentation on that focus. Nakano-san, please.
Thank you so much, Steven-san, and thank you so much, Patsy, for having me again. The U.S., I wanted to spend a little time just talking about how the priorities have changed for the United States under the Biden administration and what that may mean for the scope for the bilateral partnership and certainly cooperation as well as a partnership between the two countries. The U.S. priorities really changed with the inauguration of the Biden administration this January. Climate change is one of the top focus areas, as by now many of us have heard multiple speeches by senior officials from the Biden administration talk about climate as part of policy making. In late January, there was the executive order that was issued by the Biden White House that has put climate change, that has placed climate crisis at the center of the U.S. foreign policy and also national security considerations. So in a way, I mean, climate is no longer, some niche area within an energy or environmental consideration as it may have been a couple of decades ago. Also, this executive order called for a whole of the government approach to climate crisis. Now, all 21 U.S. government agencies and departments have some stake in it, have a part in this government effort to address the threat of climate change. What does this mean for the domestic side for the U.S. Policy priorities? Since the time of campaign, the Biden team has looked at the way to make the U.S. economy a lot less emission intensive, achieving the economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2050 is something that's been talked about quite a bit. And within that, there's a goal to achieve carbon-free power sector by 2035. Also electrifying the transport sector by having more electric vehicles and public transport utilized is another key component. Right at the moment, the transportation sector is the highest greenhouse gas emitting sector in the United States. So addressing the transportation sector is just as important, if not more important, than addressing what's happening as far as energy using power sector and industrial sector. On the international side, rejoining the Paris Agreement has been or have been a top priority for the Biden campaign. And indeed, soon after the inauguration, the President Biden announced rejoining Paris, and the key step has been taken. I think that puts that basically means that the United States was out of the Paris Climate Agreement for, I guess, roughly 100 days, given all these sort of administrative requirements and so forth. But so it wasn't that we were out of it for the entire duration of the last administration. But of course, it has been something that the Biden administration was set to take up as soon as the team hit the ground. And also restoring the U.S. leadership on climate change is really the key priority for the team Biden administration. I think as either Adima-san or Stephen has already mentioned, there's a leadership, the Leaders Climate Summit that's scheduled for the Earth Day, April 22nd, where I think that the plan is for the United States to announce its nationally determined commitment for 2030. The effort is being made to formulate something that will be quite aspiring, something that would really signify that the United States is back in the game, back in this multilateral framework to work with others to address the climate crisis. And so in many ways, there are a lot of things that are happening on the United States side. And it's really interesting to see how the Japanese government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Suga, already made a commitment, for example, to try to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050 back in October. So obviously that was even before the US presidential elections took place. So, the Biden administration finds itself coming sort of to this climate, global climate diplomacy scene, with many of the key partners already having, strong commitments to the climate issue. And as Arima-san has mentioned, Japan has this green growth strategy for 2050, carbon neutrality, and it lists a number of ways, policy tools that Japan is committed to using in order to achieve this mid-century commitment, the goal. And then also, the document talks quite a bit about different sectors, not just energy, directly energy related, but where Japan sees, Japan believes are important for climate mitigations, but then also where the Japanese government sees as some ones with potential for economic growth. So it's not that the idea isn't to try to do something at the but while sacrificing the economic growth. It's the idea is to try to generate synergy between the two important goals. And obviously, in Japan's case, this year is the year that Japan's basic energy plan will be revealed or unveiled. So we will know more about exactly what sort of thinking that the Japanese government have. But in many ways, I think both the Biden administration and Suga cabinet are looking, into the same direction, looking at the ways that the two are positioned to be able to start cooperating quickly. And as Arima-san also said, innovation will be central for both the Biden administration and Suga cabinet to reduce carbon emissions as well as transform their energy systems. A key approach for both economies is to really electrify non-power sectors as much as possible while decarbonizing electricity sources as much as possible. So as two leading global economies with strong science and technology capabilities, the two countries have so much to gain by leveraging what each other has to bring to the table in areas like smart grid, energy storage, nuclear energy, and also carbon capture and storage. These clean energy cooperation will nicely augment the already growing energy ties between the two countries that we've seen in the past half decade or so that centered on LNG trade that has played an important role in enhancing Japan's energy security, and also supporting U.S. emergence as a major global supplier of natural gas. Japan's companies, including gas companies, electric utilities, and trading houses have become important stakeholders and partners. Last year, Japan was, I believe, the second largest destination for the US LNG. And I expect that sort of relationship to continue for some years to come. And perhaps decades to come. The natural gas still plays an important role, and it's not just for power generation. In the industrial usage is also important. And so there is, I think, the area of energy cooperation and clean energy cooperation is only, there to grow. But whether this bilateral sort of relationship and the energy-related relationship between the Prime Minister Suga's Japan and President Biden's United States will go beyond clean energy technology cooperation is a major question. There's actually some question as to how far the two countries can go together. That is because the Biden administration has very strong climate commitments that also include encouraging other economies to stop financing carbon intensive exports and also stopping China from subsidizing coal exports. And this is there's already a lot of talk about how to bring this to more of a multinational or multilateral forum such as G20. And so it'd be interesting to see how U.S. and Japan, can collaborate, because Japanese private banks and also insurance companies have come to help finance new coal projects in recent years. And also the Japanese government back in July announced that Japan, as a rule, would no longer support coal-fired exports. There are still some, projects that have been being in discussion for some time, and there is growing pressure by Western governments, including European governments, to really have more unified view among major economies, certainly among G70 governments, to really stop financing coal exports. And in many ways, I think Tokyo has been signaling that it is really, it really shares a vision. But I would say that as far as sort of a not just coal, but a lot of energy infrastructure export initiatives in Asia goes, there's a more of a geopolitical dimension to it. That is to say that there's commercial and industrial competition with key rivals such as China, and there is a lot of considerations that go into type of energy capacity. Energy power generation, or just energy resource trading and investments that are taking place in Asia Pacific, especially in Southeast Asia, where under the Belt and Road Initiative, China has been extremely active in exporting its power generation equipment and components. So this is one area which I think will be an interesting area to keep a close eye on, because to the Biden administration, definitely, climate definitely is one of the top concerns and top priorities. But then also what to do with China, addressing this growing rivalry from China is another area where Biden administration is set to work, have sort of across the government approach in addressing. So we shall see how this I don't want to call them competing priorities, but how both the climate change and also geoeconomic competition with China may play out, and how that may affect the scope of US, Japan, clean energy, and perhaps climate cooperation, especially in Asia Pacific. So let me stop there, and I look forward to questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, Nakano-san. Yes, please, if anyone in the audience has any questions, there is a button down at the bottom of the Zoom call. It's Q&A. Please feel free to send the questions our way. We'll be answering, we'll be opening up the floor to those questions, but just slot them in now so that you don't forget, and so that I have enough in my arsenal when I open this up. But one quick question to follow questions in, you do mention, Japan potentially being a large importer of American LNG over the next few decades. There's no doubt about that, but there is a push internationally to clean up the LNG supply chain. There was one French importer who decided to not go forward with a US contract because the US LNG was dirtier. They were under pressure from environmental groups. Meanwhile, folks in Japan, actually Tokyo Gas, started a organization just yesterday to purchase so-called zero carbon LNG, which is LNG with carbon offsets so that it's cleaner. Do you think that there is going to be more pressure on American LNG going to Japan to clean up, not just clean up at the facility, like what Shenyang is doing, but also clean up the shale fields as well. Make sure you tighten methane emissions. And do you think there's going to be pressure from the Japanese companies? And do you also expect pressure from the Biden administration?
Definitely from the Biden administration. I think there'll be pressure. I don't know if it's really pressure. I think it's something that needs to be done if natural gas wants to be part of the conversation. and as part of this energy transition that has already started. But in many ways, the energy mix reality in Asia is quite different from Europe. In Europe, there's so much more focus on renewables. Even 3 years ago, the role of natural gas was very much under scrutiny. Whereas in Asia, the competition is often against coal. Natural gas is the cleaner, or if not the cleanest form of fossil fuel. And so there's this completely different dynamics. And, but, on the importer side, Stephen, as you mentioned, the buyers are much more interested in, environmentally and also climate sustainable form of energy, fossil fuel exports from the U.S. And also for the U.S. stakeholders, it's already starting. I mean, the attention on methane, the discussions are much, it's actually speeding up with the inauguration of Biden administration, but also companies are starting to be even more aware that, they don't, I'm not sure if this is the best way to say it, but no one wants to be the next coal. At the same time, as the role of natural gas may come under a bit of a pressure within the U.S. power generation system, as the Biden vision for 2035 is to decarbonize power sources, I think export will become even more important for sort of sustained production. And for that reason, for the so-called social license to operate, it's only methane emissions and all the and also other environmental issues have to be part of the story.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. Now we'll be shifting over to Tokyo Gas's Monguchi-san, who will be providing a presentation on the corporate angle. Kicking this off, how is Japan and a company like Tokyo Gas planning to diversify its portfolio to meet and enhance demands for energy security and achieve a low carbon future? Monguchi-san, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Stevenson. Okay, good evening and good morning. So my name is Takuo Monguchi, SVP of Tokyo Gas America. So it's my pleasure to introduce myself and Tokyo Gas America at such a great conference. I'd like to express my appreciation to the Embassy of Japan, the National Association of Japan America Societies, and Josh for this great opportunity. Tokyo Gas America is a 100% Tokyo Gas owned subsidiary and was established in Houston on February 1st, 2013. We have grown from a few people at our start to staff of over 40, including Japanese and local employees currently. Now I'd like to introduce our parent company in Japan and our activities in the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, so Tokyo Gas was established in 1885, and they have more than 130 years corporate history in Japan. Their main business is supplying gas and power to customers around Tokyo. The number of the customers for gas and power is 12 million and 2.5 million, respectively. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide shows Tokyo Gas's global offices. They are operating mainly in 3 regions: Asia, Australia, and the United States. And they have operating companies in those areas. Next slide, please. Okay, according to the location of global offices, they are operating several projects in those 3 areas. All are energy-related businesses, and they have upstream or oil and gas production business in Australia and mid-downstream business in Asian countries. Mid-downstream means or includes power generations, energy receiving terminals, and some services close to users. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to introduce Compass 2030, which is Tokyo Gas's management vision. I picked up 2 slides regarding today's topics from Compass 2030. First slide is their will to become a leading company toward net zero CO2 by 2050. There are 2 phases, from now to 2030, and beyond 2030. By 2030, Tokyo Gas Group is trying to reduce CO2 by 100 metric ton per year, or 1/3 of the emissions they have currently at the customer side, mainly by expanding renewables and effective use of natural gas. After 2030, new technologies such as hydrogen and CCUS may be necessary, and Tokyo Gas is preparing for it until 2030. Next slide, please. And their target of the renewables capacity in 2030 is 5 gigawatt. At the time Tokyo Gas announced Compass 2030, they only have 5 megawatt, or 0.005 gigawatt. Now they have 1.4 gigawatt, including Tokyo Gas America's activity in the United States. If you can see the right side of the slide, Tokyo Gas is trying to promote the development of floating offshore wind power. Next slide, please. So from here, I'd like to introduce Tokyo Gas America's activities in American region. As shown in this slide, our business is a shale gas, natural gas fired power plant, natural gas exporting, and renewables. From those projects, I'd like to explain 2 projects in the next slides. Next slide, please. Okay, the first one is renewables. The name of that project is Akspina solar project. The capacity is 500 megawatt, or 0.5 gigawatt. This is one of the largest solar projects in Texas, and we will start operation from this August this year. And it is located at 60 miles away from Houston. So it is located at 60 miles away from Houston, and Tokyo Gas America is trying to continuously increase the number of renewables and capacity of renewables in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, this is my last slide. So Tokyo Gas and CCI. CCI is Castle Commodities International, jointly operating gas and oil company. The name of the company is TG Natural Resources, former Castle Resources. So Tokyo Gas America invested into Castle Resources in 2017 and increased the stake of the company in 2019 and 2020 and became a majority owner of the company. Now we have more than 70% of the stake of the company. It's pure oil and gas company and doing their business both in Texas and Louisiana. We'd like to expand their business continuously. And at the end of my introduction, Tokyo Gas Group believe renewables and natural gas are the good combination, and we continue to develop our business in both areas, and we'd like to contribute to the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comprehensive presentation, Munguchi-san. That's very helpful. One more quick reminder to the audience, please send in questions. I'm going to be opening up the floor very soon. Ask all your burning questions into the chat or into the Q&A section. I'll relay it to our illustrious panelists. But before I do that, I've got one question for Munguchi-san, and it is about the future of Japanese investment in shale gas and oil in the United States. Earlier this year, the Sumitomo Corporation said that it will not invest in any more upstream oil projects and has actually exited all of its American shale projects. Do you think that this trend will accelerate among Japanese corporations? Do you think more Japanese companies will exit shale? or do you think the Sumitomo decision is just an outlier? Please, Monguchi-san.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan-san. It's a really good question. So it could be my personal opinions, but if I think about Japan and if I see the Arima-san's presentation, Japan or Tokyo Gas really for Japan and Tokyo Gas, natural gas is a necessary energy. So in terms of that, Tokyo Gas, I think Tokyo Gas needs to develop natural gas, and we should bring natural gas into Japan because Japan doesn't have enough natural gas or any other energy resources. So one important role for Tokyo Gas is to continuously bring the natural gas into Japan, at least until 2030 or sometime in between 2030 and 2050. In that sense, Tokyo Gas also needs to, it is a good for Tokyo Gas to continuously develop shale gas business in the United States it can be reduce our risks regarding the price in LNG or natural gas that we are importing into Japan. So for that reason, at this moment, at least Tokyo Gas is continuously doing shale gas business in the United States. But for the other companies, like you said, it may be difficult question to the company who which doesn't have direct customers or energy users. It could be really difficult decision making towards the future.
Thank you, Monguchi-san. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I think, you know, as I said earlier, Sumitomo Corporation is not an end user like Tokyo Gas. Tokyo Gas has millions of customers in Japan that need natural gas. So that answer is very interesting. Thank you for your view. I have a question from the audience that I'm going to raise to everyone, but specifically to Arima-san, Sensei. Is Japan focusing on large-scale nuclear projects or considering more localized advanced reactors? He answered that in the chat, but Arima-san, Sensei, if you could expand on that, I think it would be very helpful for everyone involved.
Okay, thank you very much. And the question is Japan is focusing on large-scale nuclear reactors or more localized small-scale reactors? And as I presented, for the time being, our priority is, but a green growth strategy also include the innovation plan for next-generation nuclear power technologies, and that certainly include SMR. And I think, you know, in accordance with the rising share of so-called variable renewables, VRE, I think the nuclear should also be able to respond to the fluctuation of the power generation from renewable energy sources. So for the happier coexistence between nuclear and renewable, I think we should also look at the small-scale nuclear options. So in short, I think, you know, currently large scale, but in the future, we will also have a look on small-scale nuclear reactors. So that's all. Thank you.
I see. Thank you very much. And I think I've got a question here for Nakano-san. You know, there's a you know, Biden policy on climate change is encouraging, but its development all depends on major energy states like Texas, whose political leaders are already clear in sort of fighting against some of those efforts by the Biden administration. How can Biden and his government persuade Texas that new climate goal policy can generate good business and is worthwhile?
That's a great question. Sorry, yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, the states like, for example, I mean, Texas, has oil, gas, natural resource wealth, but also, wind power is increasingly part of the portfolio. So, it's, I think that's, part of the issue is that, states are starting to see business case and, that, arise from, not necessarily, resources that have been traditionally part of their economy. But, the most recent, the polar vortex induced the blackouts, as that showed, there is price to be paid for not, recognizing that there are all these climate change induced extreme weather events that make it very important for the societies and communities to make necessary investment into, enforcing the power grid and transmission systems. And it's not so much fuel issue. I think, it depends, but in many ways, it's more of a system-wide issue that you have to keep making investments. The other thing I was going to say was, despite, some, more of a deregulatory environment of the last, couple of years, I'm not sure if there was really the deregulatory environment necessarily caused huge job boom, if you will. I think that, things like sort of a shale, gas, oil, benefit predated, the last administration. And lastly, I think it sort of ties back to the question, Stephen, I think you gave me a little earlier this evening, which is, a lot of buyers want to be much more part of a sustained value chain, energy value chains. So if you're a state whose economy, relies, and not necessarily, completely dependent, but where, energy extraction is main part of your, local economy, then you want to make sure that it is something that still finds buyers, major buyers, sustain, customer base. So, whether you're producing state or whether you're a state that also hosts export facilities like LNG terminals, that's, you also have to be attuned to not just what you want, but, but what you think you want, but also what the market is looking for. So I think, I would think that the conversation will probably continue to evolve, and, some states will, probably see more benefit to being part of the discussion as opposed to just sort of being outside, not being, because if you don't try to be part of the solution, you could be really left out.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I appreciate it. Now, going to Onguchi-san again, we have an interesting question about the impact COVID-19 has had on Japanese energy demand, and has that changed Japanese demand for U.S. energy imports, perhaps U.S. LNG imports? I guess the question is, how has COVID-19 shaped gas demand in Japan, and has that affected the exports of U.S. LNG to Japan? Thank you.
Okay, so in fact, I'm not so familiar with the updated number of the natural gas consumption in Japan, but yes, briefly speaking, just after the COVID-19 things started, demand declined in Japan, as of course, as well as in the United States or any other countries. But after 6 months from the beginning, or at the current situation, the demand is going back. Demand has come back to the quite close to the normal or last year's demand rate. I think probably because economy comes back to normal, getting back to normal, and also if we think about the gas consumption or energy consumption, regardless the place of the working place or activities areas, we need to use energy. So the reduction, we saw the reduction in the energy usage consumption at the building side or commercial building side. But if we see the residential side, demand actually increased. So in total, I think according to the economy's situation, gas or energy demand in Japan is getting to be normal at this situation. And I believe the number of the LNG exported from United States is also coming back to normal. Or actually, the capacity of the liquefaction plant in the United States is increasing. So in that sense, the number of the LNG exported from the United States is also increasing.
Yes, that's correct. The U.S. shipped a record number for monthly cargoes in
Yes.
November, December last year. It's quite a lot. You know, there's one more interesting follow-up question for you, Munguchi-san. There's someone who'd like to learn or like to ask you about the lessons learned Tokyo Gas got from its investments in shale gas. You know, what different approaches do you plan to take moving forward for U.S. shale gas? What worked with shale producers? What didn't work so well? Any insight on those experiences, I think, would be really interesting.
It's a really good question, and it's something about our secret. But yes, we started shale gas business in Texas in 2013, and at that moment, probably you can, if you remember, the gas price was much higher than the current gas price is. It was around $5. Henry Hub price was $5 MMBTU. So in that sense, the volatility. So we at least we should have a strength to mitigate that kind of the volatilities in the gas and oil price. So I think there are a lot of things to do if I think about the operation of the shale gas business, but the most important thing is the price volatility in the price.
Thank you, Munguchi-san. You're a good businessman. You can't give away the company's secrets. That's a good point. So we have another interesting question about Japan's grid. As some of you might be aware, East Japan, the grid in Japan, there are two different frequencies. East Japan is 50 hertz, West Japan is 60 hertz. That's because back, when the grids were being made in the late Meiji era, Kansai Electric, or the company that became Kansai Electric, was importing technology from I think Europe, and U.S. was importing technology, or Tokyo Electric was importing technology from the United States. That created two frequencies, and it creates some problems across the grid, and they're not able to easily interconnect, something that Arima Sensei mentioned. We have a question here asking if they plan to harmonize the Japanese grids in order to increase distribution capacity in the future. Arima Sensei, can you help answer that interesting question?
Yes, very interesting but challenging question. And as rightly pointed out, there is a difference of the frequencies between 50 hertz and 60 hertz. And actually, there was a discussion to, say, unify the frequency back in 1940, just before the war. But that turned out to that it will cost enormous amount of money. And Japan could not afford to such a big investment. So even very strong central power enjoyed by the central government during the wartime, they could not exercise such a big investment. So therefore, I think the completely unifying frequency throughout Japan is not, say, realistic, I have to say, but rather they would consider enhancing the frequency exchange between eastern part and western part of Japan. And they could increase the capacity for frequency change. And they would focus on the interconnection between eastern part, within the eastern part and within western part. So that could be more pragmatic solution, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. And if you buy a toaster in Osaka, sometimes it doesn't work in Tokyo. So be careful next time you buy a toaster. We have another really interesting, Rima-sensei, I have you here. We have another really interesting question I wasn't aware of. But there was a study recently done that Japan has over 3,000 large dams at an average age of over 100 years old. That's quite old. Do you think that there is risk of possible dam failure and aging hydroelectric dam structures affecting the estimate of Japan's renewable energy sources moving forward? And on top of that, I want to add, do you think that that's going to require a lot of investment from the government over the next 30 years to upgrade the hydroelectric infrastructure?
So thank you very much for your question. And I have not realized this report, but I'm not an expert of the Japanese hydropower generation, but I think that hydropower generation plant is, say, fairly maintained by the utility companies, and I did not see such big risk of the hydropower dam failure. And of course, they will say renovate or maintain periodically for the hydropower dam. But I don't think there is a big risk of the failure. And the concerning the development of the future hydropower generation plant in Japan, that would be very much challenging because we have already exhausted the large-scale hydro potential. So the remaining part is small-scale hydro, but small-scale hydro tends to be very much expensive. So I think there will be some sort of upper limit for the contribution of hydropower in Japanese renewable energy mix. So all the incremental contribution of renewable could come from either from solar power or wind power. And it seems to me that the Japanese government is putting more focus on wind power, in particular offshore wind. But as I presented, the how can I say, economic viability of the offshore wind is not as promising as those in North Sea region in Europe. So that is another dilemma for Japan. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming to an end of this great panel. Got some great thoughts from everybody, and I really appreciate everyone's participation. I have a very broad question I want to pose to each one of the panelists, and it's just, Japan is revising their energy mix this year for 2030. They might keep it the same. They might revise it slightly. How do you think Japan's energy market and infrastructure will change over the next 10 years? And if you want to add to that, what does that mean for the United States? I'll start with Nakano-san, please.
Thanks, Stephen. Next 10 years, of course, as you suggested, what may come out this year from Japan will hold, will be a key question. But I think as far as for the US, things like, nuclear remains to be an area where the two governments have been cooperating for years, or well, if not, decades, truly. So any advancement in technology, I think the U.S. continues to look to Japan for a lot of expertise, exchange, etc. And also, let me see. I think grid is going to be another important one because renewable resources are great. But you have to have modern grid to be able to fully take advantage of it. And a lot of infrastructure in the United States really need updating. So in many ways, a lot of operational technology wise, I think there'll probably be continued interest. And of course, natural gas, I think, will continue to be very important. In my view, I don't think the United States has really clear, concise vision as to what we want to do with hydrogen. But to the extent that we have natural gas resources, and Japan needs energy resources, including natural gas, and hydrogen already being Japan's important sort of net neutrality vision. I think there is a great synergy. So I think now that the details are yet to be worked out, but that may be one of the more shorter term area where we might see a lot more discussions between business leaders as well as government leaders. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Monguchi-san, the same question to you. What do you see over the next 10 years, perhaps for investment or for cooperation between the two countries?
Okay, so in terms of the energy security, so Japan needs to import energy, like Nakano-san mentioned. So, but at the same time, we need to reduce carbon emissions until 2030 or beyond 2030. So it's not a good answer to you, but Japan or I think we need to do everything we can. So it's something like a mixture. So we may need to think about zero emission energy, like you mentioned, and we may think about, of course, a renewable at the house on top solar or that kind of things, because Japan also doesn't have a large land. So we need to use any roof or any spaces for renewables. So it's kind of the mixture. So that is not a good answer, I think, but I believe that could be the realistic story.
That's a great answer. All of the above. It makes a lot of sense for Japan. And Anima Sensei, to you, you also mentioned that nuclear was a 8,000 pound gorilla in the room. Over the next 10 years, what's your view on Japan Energy, and will they need to essentially just restart every reactor they have?
Yeah, thank you very much. And of course, between now and 2030, there will be a more installation of the renewable energy power sources, and Japanese government is expecting a lot from offshore wind. So there will be more renewable energy facilities, and that will require call for more grid connection between renewable energy facilities. And also we need to modernize the aging power grid to more smarter and modern ones. And also for decarbonizing, say, transport sector, government will prepare, the electricity vehicle battery charging station or FCB station and so on. So there will be a huge, how can I say, clean energy related investment. So that would be, the major trends between now and 2030. And concerning Japan-US relation and cooperation, as Jen said, the nuclear is still very much important element for US-Japan cooperation. And I know that Biden administration is also looking at nuclear as an option for decarbonizing power sector. And as I said, in Japan, a political environment for nuclear is something like a cul-de-sac situation. But I know that US is expecting Japan to raise their NDCs and also to pave the way for carbon neutrality towards 2050. So then if US is putting pressure on Japan on, say, decarbonized future, I would also expect US to say that, Japan, why you do not use your domestic nuclear technologies? And I remember that the Felix Yoshida, the former colleague of Jane, has recently published the paper concerning Japanese civil nuclear industry. And looking at the international civil nuclear trade, China and Russia is raising their profile. And why Japan's nuclear industry needs to simply die out that's completely, say, absurd. So reviving Japanese nuclear industry is indispensable. And if U.S. could send such a strong expectation and strong signal to Japan, then that could have some implication for the domestic countersuck situation in Japan. And then the other innovation is also very much important, like hydrogen and CCUS. And in particular, I think hydrogen and CCUS is crucial for Asian region, because the Asian region is very much dependent on fossil fuel, and that will be continuously so in coming years. So given that situation, how to say minimize the increase of the CO2 emissions? First, they should consider, say, clean use of thermal technologies, and then they should eventually look at the switching from coal to natural gas, and then say decarbonization by CCUS, and also producing hydrogen, first from gray hydrogen and gradually to say blue hydrogen, and eventually green hydrogen. But I think expansion of the hydrogen market is quite important for making hydrogen technologies economically viable. So we should not be too much, how can I say, picky and choosy about the color of the hydrogen for the time being. So even though hydrogen is produced from, say, fossil fuels, we should not neglect or reject from the outset. So my, how can I say, last message to the US is, they should look at Asian energy situation in a very much pragmatic manner. So I know some of the US energy experts close to Biden administration are of the view that Asian countries should leapfrog, say, complete change from fossil fuel to renewables overnight, but that is impossible. And as I said, for Asian countries, affordability of the energy supply is quite important. And actually, there are many domestic fossil fuels resources, in particular coal, in those countries. So it is not realistic to consider that they could abandon their domestic energy resources and just count on, say, import of the US LNG, or just count on invariable, say, unstable, say, renewables. So as Moguchi-san said, each country should look at whole the spectrum of the energy options. So I very much expect that the current US administration could give, say, a pragmatic view on Asian energy reality. Thank you.
That's really a great overview. Don't be picky on nuclear and green, brown, blue hydrogen. Really great view. We're out of time. Thank you all for participating. This was a fantastic panel. Really, these folks are at the top of the industry. They know their stuff, and it was very enjoyable to listen to them all speak. I'll pass this back to Patsy now.
Thank you, Stephen, Arima-sensei, Nakano-san, and Monguchi-san for insightful presentations and very thought-provoking discussion. The pathway to net zero is certainly riddled with challenges, but there are many options to consider, and it's encouraging to hear that there's synergy and potential for US-Japan bilateral collaboration. There's much more that could be discussed today on the various topics that were brought up. But to stay informed on Japan-related energy ongoings, you can follow both Stephen and Jane on Twitter. And to engage in additional Japan-related programs and activities, please visit the JASH website and social media portals. This week, there are actually a number of programs commemorating the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami and the Fukushima nuclear accident that are being presented across the National Association of Japan-American Societies Network. So please join us as we remember 3/11. Wasuremasen. As you leave the webinar tonight, we ask that you take a moment to complete the post-event survey that will pop up on your screen. If you're unable to view or access the survey, we will share it again through email in a few days. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Arigatou gozaimashita.